Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Hysong again. Today is Wednesday, April the 8th, and I pray that your week has gotten off to a good start and that you're looking forward to finding out what happens to Lassie this week. Yesterday, you read chapter 9, where Priscilla allowed Lassie to escape and head for home. Today, we'll be reading chapter 10, which tells us all about the beginning of her journey home. I apologized last week that you had to look at a black screen and then a very blurry enlarged picture of the book cover. Today I am hoping that you are seeing a picture of my son David's collie, whose name is Darcy. I thought it would be fun for you to get to see a picture of the collies that are living with me right now. We'll start with Darcy, and the next time we read, we'll pick another one. He has Marius, Emmy, and Darcy. So I pray that you are seeing a picture of Darcy right now. And here we go. Chapter 10, A Long Journey's Beginning. It was growing dusk as Lassie came down the dusty road. Now she trotted more slowly, and there was indecision in her gait. She halted and then turned back toward the direction from which she had come. She lifted her head, for she was badly puzzled. Now the pull of the time sense was leaving her. A dog knows nothing of maps and of distances as a man does. By this time, Lassie should have met the boy, and they should now be on their way home again, home to eat. It was time to eat. The years of routine told Lassie that. Back in the kennels, there would be a platter of fine beef and meal set before her. But back in the kennel, also, was a chain that made a dog a prisoner. Lassie stood in indecision, and then another sense began to waken. It was the homing sense, one of the strongest of all instincts in animals. And home was not the kennel she had left. Home was a cottage where she lay on the rug before the fire, where there was warmth and where voices and hands caressed her. Now that she was lost, that was where she would go. She lifted her head as the desire for her true home woke in her. She scented the breeze as if asking directions. Then, without hesitation, she struck down the road to the south. Do not ask any human being to explain how she should know this. Perhaps thousands upon thousands of years ago, before man educated his brain, he too had the same homing sense. But if he had it, it is gone now. Not with all his brain development can man tell how a bird or an animal can be created. Taken miles away in darkness, and when released, strike straight back toward its home. Man only knows that animals can do what he can neither do himself nor explain. And in Lassie there was no hesitation. Her senses were now aware of a great satisfaction, for there was peace inside her being. She was going home. She was happy. There was no one to tell her, and no way for her to learn that what she was attempting was almost in the realm of the impossible, that there were hundreds of miles to go over wild land. A journey that would baffle most men going afoot. A man can buy food on the way, but what coin has a dog to pay for food? No coin except the love of his master. A man can read signs on the road, but a dog must go blindly, on instinct. A man would know how to cross the great locks which stretch from east to west, almost across the entire country, barring the way of any animal going south. And how could a dog know that she was valuable, and that in villages and towns lived hundreds of men of keen eye who would wish to capture her for that reason? There were so many things that a dog could not know, but by experience a dog might learn. Happily, Lassie set out. The journey had begun. In the last of the long northern twilight, two men sat outside their cottage. It was like the other cottages of the village, which lined the old narrow street. The walls were thick with the whitewash coating of years. The elder man, clad in rough homespun, lit his pipe carefully and lifted his head as it drew freely. He watched the puffs of smoke eddying away in the still evening air. Then he felt the sudden clasp of the younger man's hand on his arm. "Wooly, see yonder?" The older man looked where the other was pointing. He sat for some time until his eyes saw more plainly in the evening. It was a dog coming toward them. The younger man, who wore leggings and a corduroy suit, stood up. "Looks like a good 'un, Wooly," he said. "Aye, Gordy, a fine collie." Their eyes followed it as it trotted near. Then the younger man stirred. "Heavers, Wooly, It looks like that fine collie belonging to the laird. It is, I'll swear on it. I saw it 2 days back when I were up chinning to McQueen about the salmon season. It'll be escaped, no doubt. Och, and then there'll be, a reward for the mon that finds Lassie. Hi. The younger man flung his last cry over his shoulder, for he was dashing out into the street. He barred the dog's way. Here, lass, he called. Here, lass. He patted his hand on his knee in a gesture of friendliness. Lassie looked up at him. Her ear had caught the sound, which was almost her name, Lass. Had the man walked toward her, she might have let him place his hand on her. But he moved too quickly. Suddenly, Lassie was reminded of Heinz. She veered slightly, and without altering her trot, ran past him. The man drove at her. Her muscles flexed, and like a football star, she put on a spurt that upset his timing. She loped a few steps, and then went back to the purposeful trot. But the man raced after her down the village street. Lassie quickened her pace again and broke into a steady gallop. The more he chased her, the more firmly it was becoming fixed in her mind that she must not let any human being put his hands on her. To chase a dog is merely to teach it to run away. When the Scot saw that he had no chance of catching the dog by speed, he halted and picked up a loose flint. He thought he could hurl it ahead of Lassie so that the sound of the falling stone might head her off and turn her back toward him. He drew back his arm and threw. The aim was bad. The stone fell almost at Lassie's shoulder. Even as it was falling, she changed her gallop as a well-trained polo pony does, leading with the other forefoot. She veered away into the ditch. Belly close, she went at an amazing speed. There was a gap in the hedge. She faded through it and shot away from the road up into the bleak back country. Once there, she turned south again and went back to the steady trot. But now Lassie had learned one thing. She must keep away from men. For some reason that she could not understand, their hands were against her. Their voices now were rough and angry. They shouted and threw things. There was menace in men. Therefore, she must keep away from them. The thought stayed firmly with her. Lassie had learned her first lesson in the first day. That first night, Lassie traveled steadily. Never before in her 5 years of life had she been out alone at night. So there was no training to help her, only her instinct. But the instinct within her was keen and alert. Steadily, she followed a path over the heather-clad land. The path filled her with a warm satisfaction, for it was going south. She trotted along it confidently and surely. At last, she reached a rise, and then, in the hollow below, she saw the dim shapes of farm buildings. She halted abruptly, with her ears thrown forward and her nose trembling. Her magnificently acute senses read the story of the habitation below as clearly as a human being might read a book. She read of horses standing in the barns, of sheep, of another dog, of food, of humans. She started down the slope warily. The smell of food was pleasant, and she had gone a long time without eating. But she knew she must be cautious, for men were there, too. And it was becoming fixed in her mind that she must keep away from them. She trotted down the path. Then there came a sudden challenging bark of the other dog. She could hear him racing toward her. She stood, waiting. Perhaps he was friendly. But he was not. He came tearing up the path, his mane erect, his ears flat. Lassie crouched to meet him. As he sprang, she stepped aside. He turned, giving loud voice in hysterical rage. His tones were saying, "This is my home. You are an intruder. It is my home, and I will defend it." Then from the farm below came the muffled voice of a man. "What is it, Tammy? Sick him up." At the sound of the human voice, Lassie wheeled. She trotted away. This was not her home. She was an outcast here. The rough-coated shepherd charged at her as she loped away, worrying at her flanks. She turned quickly, her lip curling. As if that menace were enough, the other dog drew back. Steadily she trotted on. The farm was soon left behind. She went over the wild country, following the animal paths. Finally, in a depression, she scented water. She found the small, cold stream and lapped greedily. The sky was graying in the east. She looked about her. By a rock, she scratched gently with her forepaw. She turned around 3 times and then curled herself up. Behind her was the protecting overhang of the rock. Her head faced outward. Now, even though she slept, her nose and ears would warn her of any approaching danger. She put her head on her paw and sighed loudly. Early the next morning, Lassie was on her way again. She went steadily at a swinging trot that drove at the miles. Her muscles paced with inexorable rhythm, uphill, downhill. She did not pause or hesitate. Whenever a path ran to the south, she followed it. If it veered away, she left it, keeping to animal paths through the dense heather and brush. When a path had led toward a town or a farm, she shied away, circling the habitations to keep away from man. So at the places where men lived, she went warily, instinctively keeping under cover, gliding like a ghost under the shadow of thicket and brush, taking advantage of any woodland. For the most part, her ground lay uphill, for ahead of her was a range of blue mountains. Unerringly, she headed for the lowest dip where there would be a pass. As the day wore on and she gained higher ground and higher, the sky became overcast. The clouds looked leaden. Then suddenly there was a flash and thunder pealed. Lassie hesitated and whined in a quick, querulous tone. She was frightened. It is little use to blame a dog for having fear. A dog has so many braveries that its few fears do not cancel them out. And truth to tell, there are few collies that can stand thunder and lightning. There are many dogs that do not mind such noise. There are breeds of hunting dogs that are never so happy as when a gun is sounded. But not a collie. It seems as if this breed, having worked so long as man's companion, has learned that such sharp, savage sounds may mean hurt, and the crack of a gun will send most collies running for cover. Other foes they will face, but not the unknown danger of noise. So Lassie hesitated. The rolling peals of thunder echoed through the mountains, and the torrents of rain lashed down in one of the wild storms of North Scotland. For a long time she fought her fear, but at last it was too much. She trotted to a place on the boulder-strewn pass where overhanging ledges made a dry cave. There she crouched, pressing herself back against the rock as the thunder drummed and echoed like a barrage of guns. But if she had halted her journey, it was not for long. As the storm went muttering away down the mountain range, she got to her feet. For a second she stood, head high, questing the breeze. Then again she started, going in that long, swinging trot. The rain and the splashed earth now made the beautiful expanse of her coat tarnished and spotted, but she kept on going steadily, going to the south.